Hello, I'm Fox, Fox Fairy, and I do art while I break down politics and discourse. All from a marginalized viewpoint, of course. Sorry for all the background noise in this video. My boyfriend was in the background causing a tornado or something, I don't know. Anyways, bear with me for the first half of this video. Thanks. Hey y'all! So I've recognized that in recent weeks, the truscum community has become a lot less safe for non-binary trans people and GNC trans people. I just wanted to cover that today, seeming as how I've just been becoming a lot more like attuned to the community and stuff, so I just wanted to talk about it. So, disclaimer, normally I would say that I'm cis, so I don't have the right to speak over or speak completely on this topic, but actually recently I've come to the conclusion that I am experiencing duosex dysphoria and I am getting counseling for that. Long story short, I am trans, I am duosex. If you don't know what that means, I am dysphoric for both completely male and completely female bodies. I can only be completely comfortable with a body that has the primary sex characteristics of a male, but the secondary and tertiary sex characteristics of a female. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. So, radicalization. What is a radical? A radical is someone who's willing to circumvent the point of the cause, be a general dick to people, or say things that are particularly extreme in order to get their point across, or a set of beliefs that is so extreme that it has to be distinguished from the main group of a certain community, normally a community that has a specific set of beliefs or ideologies. In this case, I'm going to do more of a breakdown of the whole anti-NB, anti-GNC situation. I'm not going to go for a detailed explanation on what a radical is. I've already done a breakdown. It's not that great, but it exists, and you can watch that if you want. However, I'm just going to be breaking down what I have here today, and you'll be able to fill in the blanks. I'm proud of you. You're smart. You'll figure it out. So, what causes this radicalization that has been occurring recently? Mostly an aggressive stance against non-binary trans people and GNC trans people. Completely different things. I'll continue. So, the first reason is bigotry translates into power. When you have another group, even if they're a part of the same group that you are a part of, you can attribute your loss of identity and the things that make you weak to that group, even if they're not directly responsible for that thing. I see a lot of the times in the truscum community and the transmed community. Remember, these are not the wider groups, these are just like a minority in the community. Anyway, moving on. I've noticed that they have a tendency to blame non-binary people in specific for trans people not being taken seriously, for the whole "what are your pronouns" thing, and for the whole issue of transness being synonymous with an arbitrary spectrum of 70-something genders, which all is not the fault of the dysphoric non-binary community. We have not been saying any of this stuff. We have not been saying that you should ask for pronouns. We have not been saying anything like that. All we have been saying is that we exist, and a lot of us, especially NB medicalists, are pointing out that our existence is only here because of the gender binary, because gender is based on sex. Then the non-binary people fall on a spectrum that is based upon that binary. Continuing on, so these people tend to treat people who they don't understand or who they do understand and are purposely cognitively dissonant of their experiences poorly, so that they can feel more powerful, feel more in control of their experience. Because when you have someone to blame for something, you can ignore the larger issues, even if the people who you are blaming for that thing are experiencing a very similar thing to what you have been experiencing for years. I'm not going to say it's the same. I'm not going to sit here and say that my experience is the same as a trans woman. However, my experience follows a lot of the same plot points, which would bring the general medical conclusion to me being like mostly on the way there, if that makes any sense. I don't know what it means to be a woman, and I'll never claim to, but a lot of the transitional steps that I'm taking do equate to a trans woman's transition. So, a lot of radicals like to appeal to society by deviating from it. They deviate from the larger scientific community, which, in your defense, has not been saying that non-binary dysphoria is caused by neurology yet. However, the greater medical community does and has recognized non-binary people and their dysphoria as clinical. Take, for example, the American Psychiatric Association, which has a more truscum definition of gender, non-binary, and being trans. It includes non-binary people in that discussion and in those definitions, and it includes non-binary dysphoria for desiring or feeling uncomfortable. Desire is more of a convenient term. We're not AGPs. We don't desire. We just need. Anyway, so needing a transition into a body that has no or a mixture of male and female sex characteristics. But these radicals tend to appeal to the majority in the case that they want transness to fit into the ideals that society holds perfectly. I understand that I sound like a too cute when I say this, but you can't assimilate to everything. Now, where I deviate from the too cute community on this subject is that does not mean we need to completely revamp society, and that does not mean we should attempt to change things that cannot be changed or define certain things as a social construct that are not. Gender is not a social construct. Gender is physical and experienced by everyone. It's just that the way that society addresses gender, the gender roles, are a social construct that can be harmful. However, these roles are not always harmful, and they're very good for some people. My position is that non-binary people don't have to fall outside of those roles, thus we can assimilate into society if society changes to fit our needs as well. This should be a compromise, if that makes any sense. Radicals completely undermine this thought process and instead think, I exist, I know I exist because I'm experiencing it, therefore you have to change because society has already changed a little bit for what I need, not completely, but your existence makes it harder for them to change for me. Which is a very fair point. I get where that comes from. I would feel very upset too if a community that I don't understand experiences something and claims to be experiencing the same thing that I am, because honestly, that would really suck, especially if they seem to experience something much different from me. But at the end of the day, medically, they're still recognized as experiencing what they're experiencing, and they still need the opportunity to exist in society, regardless of whether or not it's going to be difficult for society to become more accepting of them. And you have to think that these people are an extremely small minority, both non-binary people and the radicals that are pushing for the complete denial and ignorance of NB people. So the changes in society would not have to be huge. We're not saying that you have to recognize gender as not binary, just that there are some exceptions to that binary. And you have to be, and society has to be able to change just a little bit to be more welcoming of those people. I'm not saying we need to abolish gender roles by any means. Gender roles suck, they're bad, but ultimately they can be okay. I think we should strive for that okay gray area, in my opinion. You'll notice the same things with a lot of different communities, where they will take a group that has a somewhat different experience, but experiences similar oppression, and they will try and treat them like the oppression is completely different or that they don't belong, and then oppose them, despite the fact that the people that they are fighting against are also fought against by the people who are fighting against their own existence. So these, let's use the LGBT drop the T, for example, or we could also use gays against groomers. You have a group, homosexuals and bisexuals sort of, who do not support trans people because they feel as if it makes the LGBT community look bad or difficult to accept by larger society. So they feed into a more conservative mentality and oppose their existence or oppose their rights in order to make their existence more digestible towards writers. Now, I understand that if you're a radical and you're watching this and you're thinking, well, that's different because my existence is supported by neurological experiments and research, and my existence is objectively true, just as a homosexual's experience is, but a non-binary person's experience hasn't been verified by science just yet. I'll get into that later, but if you just go back a few years before we had applied the sexually dimorphic brain studies to transgender individuals, we would have not had that evidence. Would it have still been okay for Drop the T or Gays Against Rumors to say the things that they're saying against trans people? No, it wouldn't, because a lack of evidence is not a justification for bigotry. But normally this comes from a place of wanting to separate yourself from a much harder to accept thing in order to achieve certain rights. We know this doesn't work. We've tried this before. It just doesn't. The moment that group finally gets their rights taken away, the conservatives will always move backwards, and they will still be making passes against you while you're actively going against that one community that you are targeting. It's important to keep your eyes open to the issues, and when a community is experiencing similar oppression to the oppression you have experienced, you need to acknowledge that and move on with it. People who are xenogender don't experience this oppression, non-dysphorics don't experience this oppression because they can just stop whenever it's not fun anymore, but for us, we cannot just stop. Now, another thing on the appearances, GNC trans people, binary trans people who dress in a way that is not typical of the gender they're transitioning to get a lot of shit and tend to get called trenders, despite the fact that they have clear and present gender dysphoria. I want to point out that gender is not a social construct, but the clothes that we assign to gender very much is. Gender roles are a social construct, and the compromise has always been that gender is not a social construct, but gender roles and gender expression is. It does not matter how a man dresses, even if he is trans. If he has transitioned and he looks physically male, it doesn't matter what he's going to wear, he's still going to look male. So we shouldn't be shitting on people for dressing how they want to dress. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything. It's a piece of cloth. It doesn't have genitals. I'm pretty sure we came to that conclusion a long time ago. Sorry if we're going backwards. I don't want anything to do with that. Okay, so the lack of evidence argument. A lot of people say there is a lack of evidence for the existence of NBin, and I would like to point out that's true. I despise that, actually, and I think we should be moving towards a place where we can host more neurological studies on dysphoric NBin. However, the issue is that a lot of places aren't willing to do those kinds of studies because the institutions that are studying neurology of trans people tend to have it very hard in the first place because they do not get support from the larger mainstream LGBT community because of their attitudes towards bioessentialism and transmedicalism and the fact that they're providing evidence for us. So it's hard enough for them to conduct studies as it is, but then for them to go and conduct studies on NBin when there is a group within the truscum and transmed community that refuses to accept NBin as a possible existence, it would make them very hard to actually host that research with support. They might even be met with the same backlash from transmedicalists that they were initially getting from 2Cutes, as transmedicalists and those who are really dedicated to the neurology of gender are the only ones that are actually supporting these studies, and we have to remember that when we judge the lack of evidence for something. But something important to mention is that it should be evidence enough to you that there is clear and present dysphoria that has been voiced by several NBin, especially since the APA, like I said, recognizes non-binary gender dysphoria as a diagnosable condition. That is part of what makes the anti-NB stance radical, because it deviates from what we currently know about medicine, in that the most respected medical institutions that we have oppose the idea that non-binary people cannot experience proper dysphoria in the way that binary trans people do. And it is also somewhat radical because whenever they are presented with an example of how NB people experience their dysphoria, they will almost always ignore it. The conversation tends to go, oh, NB is just GNC, NB isn't real, there are no rules, it's stupid. But then when an actual non-binary person explains how their dysphoria works, instead of getting an, oh, thank you, I didn't think of it that way, they will either provide a counter-argument that is not based in the experience that they presented, just, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense, or, oh, there's so many different ways to be non-binary, so how would that even be trans? Instead of just being like, oh, okay, that is interesting, but I don't know if that's actually supported by neurology, which is a not radical way of thinking. It's just basic skepticism. Instead of approaching it like that, they're cognitively dissonant and refuse to acknowledge the words of the group in question, which is just stupid. If you make a claim about something someone else experiences and they explain it to you in a very concise and understandable way, for you to just ignore that is kind of like not very proper debate at all. Like, if someone provides an argument, you should address the argument properly instead of just outright denying it. That's not how you have productive discussions. Anyway, since most of them feel as if there's not enough evidence, I'd like to say, if you want to make that argument, then fund the research. Give us money. If you want to be a dick, support your claim. Fund research, let them experiment on the neurology of NBin, and when they don't come up with results, then you can tell me that I'm not real. But until then, calm down a little bit, okay? And like I said, the APA has a more truscum definition for all trans-related things, and they are very accepting of non-binary identities, so you should look to them when you are addressing this issue. Because when you do not even, when your ideology doesn't even vibe with one of the most respected psychiatric organizations in America, maybe you should address your understanding. I understand that a lot of psychiatric and medical institutions define gender as a social construct, but you also have to keep in mind that they're not using the same definition of gender as we are. They're simply defining gender by gender roles. That doesn't mean they're completely right or wrong. They're just using the wrong terminology, but they are correct that gender roles are socially constructed. Two cutes like to use these organizations to like pick and choose what is true and what gender is and all that, but overall they tend to overlook the point we make that gender and gender roles, the expectations and performances that we place upon ourselves, are not the same, and that our dysphoria is our gender. They just have a hard time processing that because they're cognitively dissonant, a lot like the radicals in this situation. So, does being NB skeptic make you a radical though? No, it doesn't. You can be skeptical of anything. Does being trans skeptic make you transphobic? Not necessarily, but it depends on the way that you go about it. The difference between skepticism and just being an asshole is clear and present when a group is explaining exactly to you how they experience something and you just flat out ignore it. That's where you're gonna lose me, because you're not engaging in productive conversation. You're just ignoring everything they say. You're just plugging your ears and going la 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 la, I can't hear you, basically. You're kicking and screaming. That's not productive by any means. You're not providing anything to the conversation. An example of positive skepticism is someone being like, I don't understand non-binary people because of the lack of evidence, or I don't understand non-binary people because I don't see how a condition could result in something like that, and that's perfectly fair because we don't have any evidence. However, to say that NBin objectively don't exist or objectively aren't experiencing what they are experiencing is sort of radical, because you're making a claim that is completely deviant from everything that the most respected organizations have been saying. You're deviating from the common standard, which is radical. That's what it means. I mean, the same organizations that you often use to support your own claims about binary trans people being, you know, inherent. I always fall into this burden of proof dilemma. There are always people under posts about NB people talking about their existence that just flat out make the claim non-binary isn't real, or non-binary is just GNC, or you can't have standards for something that isn't real. And I'd like to say that that's not skepticism, for one, that's just being a dick. For two, you have burden of proof in that situation, and whenever I point that out, people will be like, you're arguing in the wrong direction, you can't prove that something doesn't exist. To that I say, burden of proof falls under the person who makes a claim. If you make the claim that non-binary isn't real, you have made a claim of fact, and thus you must support that claim with evidence. Yes, technically you can't prove something isn't real, but you can provide evidence to support that something likely isn't real. If you're going to make an objective claim like that, you have to provide objective evidence that counteracts the evidence that is already in the common space. People just talking about their existence do not need to provide a source for their existence because they're providing an anecdote. You made an argument, therefore you have to support it. Even if it's a negative argument, it doesn't matter because you're making a claim. The person who made the claim has burden of proof, not the person defending, in any situation, no matter what direction you're arguing in. So conclusion, I don't know, it's just something I've noticed around. I wanted to talk about it because it's made me a bit uncomfortable seeing all this aggression recently. It seems that the transmed community is moving backwards, and instead of operating on scientific principles and like a mutual understanding model like we've been marching backwards to the days of Blair White and Calvin Gara, where it's just about owning transgenders and just being angry all the time, which is not what transmedicalism is about. It's about providing a space where we have access to the materials that we need to feel comfortable in our bodies and supporting our existence with a scientific understanding of, like, you know, everything. So, yeah, I don't know. I also want to point out that a lot of these people make other arguments like you can't be lesbian and non-binary, which doesn't make any sense, because if you don't believe in non-binary people, then you should have no issue with non-binary lesbians, because if non-binary people aren't real and a non-binary person is AFAB, then by your own definitions that person would be a lesbian, which doesn't make any sense because you also oppose that. It's kind of hypocritical to say that a non-binary blank can't happen because non-binary people aren't blank, when you don't believe that non-binary people are actually experiencing dysphoria in the first place, and you don't believe that non-binary people are an actual gender. That's like some sort of logical fallacy. This video is a bit unscripted, and it's gonna be a pain in the ass to edit. I will make another video about being duosexed, but I want to wait until I finish with my counseling and get my gender dysphoria diagnosis locked in, just because it goes against my, like, moral code to say that I'm objectively non-binary, objectively experiencing duosex dysphoria without a diagnosis. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I don't want to because that doesn't feel right to me. If you personally are uncomfortable with the amount of radicals in especially the main truscum sub, I do have a subreddit that will be in the link tree in my pinned comment, along with my Discord server and a couple other things. Look for the non-rad transmed subreddit link, and also if you want to be in my Discord server, look up the Gravity Knife Gay Solidarity Discord server. Even though I no longer identify as gay, I'd like to point out that I'm an important voice in the Gravity Knife Gay debate, since I am a Veer Emmerich NBin, and I want to continue fighting for Gravity Knife Gay beliefs, as I feel they are so fundamental to the existence of healthy gay men in the community, psychologically and just overall. I also have my Instagram and my Tumblr linked there, where I post memes, mostly on my Tumblr. I don't really use my Instagram anymore, but if you want to look at how cringy I was when I was a minor, that's something you can do. Anyway, y'all have a good day, and I love you!